All right. In the last lesson, we were talking about how Germany basically made the first moves in World War I in attacking Belgium and France. So they do attack Russia later on. We'll be getting that lesson in a little bit. But what you're seeing here is just, I'm going to be going off of this map here. Not the greatest in the world, at least, well, it's not spiffy, but it's a really good map for really showing what's going on and what I need to teach in this lesson, which in this lesson we're going to be talking about, well, how does it transition from this open land, open battlefields type of scenario where the Germans are pushing, the French were retreating until you get to that last stand type of moment, and the British are able to capitalize or take advantage of the gap. Sorry, losing my thought process there. Take advantage of the gap, and then they stop the Germans and they start pushing them back. You know, if you're looking at this map, you see the furthest extent of the Germans. You know, they're getting them right up there next to Paris, but then they get pushed back a bit. Now, something I need to explain at this point is when the Germans do get pushed back, it's not like, well, again, this just goes to the idea of their training and just their thought process, and they're just crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. You know, they had a lot of the reserve soldiers, the ones that couldn't be up at the front, making defenses just in case something like this happened. In this case, those defenses are trenches. So, I don't know if you can see my cursor here. I hope you can. But basically, as the Germans are pushed back, they come back to their trenches, say where this green line is right here, basically, and they get in there, and then they stop the French and the British and the Belgians cold. Well, at this point, it's basically just the French and the British. The Belgians are more up north. But they stop the Allies cold there, and mainly because the French, who now they're exultant at this point, they think they're going to be able to push the Germans back. They've done this great counterattack. We're going to win the war now type of feeling on their side. And then they run into these trenches and the fortifications, the simple fortifications that the Germans have up at this point. Holy cow, do they get them a lot bigger later on. And then they just die. Again, just bad. So they back off about 100 yards and they start digging their own trenches. Yes, under rifle fire, both sides just keep firing at each other. But then both sides realize that they're both dug in. It's going to be very hard to break through. Well, where does it come to? Where do you go now? Well, there's fighting down here, yes, but the target is Paris. So if there's fighting down here to basically attack here with everything you got, there's a lot of space to go around, a lot of places where the French could reorganize, again, if you're the Germans. Again, also, if you're going to attack and you're the French, well, you're attacking more into German territory there, and you want to take back the territory you've lost, and also make Paris more safe. That's the prize at the moment. So you don't see as much here, although, yes, they do start digging in trenches down this way just to make sure, and that trench system gets all the way down to the Alps mountains, impassable. You're not going to get past that. Sorry. That's what I've been explaining so far, just what I put up there. So what happens at this point? Well, it's up here. Notice where it says Ypres right there? Man, for years I said Ypres. Growing up I said Ypres. It's just the way it looks when you read it in English, but it's pronounced Ypres. So again, I hope I'm doing the French pronouncement right. But they call this the Battle of Ypres because it starts more down around here, but they just start going up against each other and up against us because the idea is, okay, let's get around. So if here's the French, the Germans, you're trying to come up and around, well, then if you can get behind the French, you're going to get them. So that's what they're trying to do here. But the French, they have the same idea. They're going to come up and try to come around the Germans. So what happens? Boom. They stop each other. No one gets past. They start building trenches, static front. So then they try it again. Boom. Stop each other, static front, build trenches. And if you look at the map over here, again, there's a nice map I like to show in class with some of the books and pictures we have. But that just keeps going. And just imagine arrows just coming up each other. And let's see if I can use this ability really quick. Where is it? See if this works. I don't want to use that color. Let's just go red. Okay, so I don't know how this is going to look. But again, Germans try to come up around. French come up around. Boom. And they extend the trenches up in there. Come up around. Boom. Extend the trenches until you're right up to the very end. Yeah, it's a terrible looking drawing there, but I hope you get the idea. Now, something I would like to mention, though, is that when it got up to this very top part, it was actually looking like the Germans might get around earlier because I don't want to go into the massive explanation, but basically they beat the French to the punch. They had a little bit more troops. They had better positioning. They had better logistics in order to get their soldiers up there. And it looked like they might be able to get around north of Ypres, around the French and British positions up there. The things they weren't counting on is the King of Belgium, who was with his the last bit of his men, was actually trapped up in that area as well. And just to give the idea of what happens here, for like the last couple hundred years, maybe longer than that, the Belgians had been, this whole area right here, I hope you're seeing that, I don't know, basically this whole area right here, if you're seeing that, is basically lower than sea level. And so they have a lot of dikes and dams, levees, or what do you want to call them, built up to protect that land, and they've been desalinating it, meaning taking the salt out of the earth, which kills crops, and making it some of the best, most fertile farmland in the world. And I do mean in the world. So, and they have that. The thing is that's the area where the German troops are coming through. That's where they're deploying through. And the Belgians see that. And the only soldiers that are able to do anything about this at this point are the Belgians. But they don't run out there and try to stop the Germans all by themselves. That's kind of suicide at this point. What the Belgian king does is, well, this is why I brought up the whole idea of making that whole land, is he breaks the dams and the levees and the dikes and just unleashes seawater all through that region and just makes it a swamp, makes it pretty much impassable for a large force of men to get through. So I'm told they're still trying to repair that, because, by the way, that did happen again in World War II. The Germans actually did the exact same thing in that area to stop the British and the Americans from advancing too far in towards the end of World War II. So 2 times that place has just been flooded with seawater in both world wars, in the 19-teens and the 1940s. And again, so I understand to this day, they're still trying to reclaim that land and make it the farmland it used to be that took them hundreds of years to get. I'm assuming they're doing a pretty good job because we got better technology these days, but again, that's what I read. So this is what's called the Battle of Ypres, where all of a sudden now, Battle of First and Second Ypres, you've seen that. But this is just over the course of a few days. Like I just talked about the first few months being some of the bloodiest ever, then all of a sudden, you lose that amount of people. That's soldiers dead within a week from both sides, not one side or the other, from both sides. Around 250,000 die trying to get around each other, because both sides they see it. They know they just got to get around. And, the loss of life basically seems acceptable to each side in just trying to get around. The French, we need to save ourselves. The Germans, we need to win this. Anyways, it just gets bad. There's a story I have my students read, or have you guys read at this point, talking about a group of basically newly graduated students, either high school and college, that had barely received any training, full of nationalistic fervor. This group is called the Kindermord. And they're just thrown into this. They're just the extra lives thrown into this, where most of them just get shredded by the British. And there's a lot of accounts from the British talking about how, as they're just shooting these kids, as in some cases they're singing as they attack. These nationalistic songs they have about the fatherland, being Germany, that is. And the British are like, they can't let them get past. They can't let them get there. But man, they're feeling bad that they're just killing these kids every time they fire their rifle. They're just easy targets. They're kids. They're dead before their time. This doesn't seem right. But hey, you can't let them get through. By the way, the area where they sent the Kindermord in was mostly against British troops, and so yeah, it's just there's a lot of accounts from both sides talking about how awful it was, to where that wasn't really a battle. It was more of a slaughter of the innocents, you could say. So you can look that up if you'd like to. I won't go into that much more, but there's tons of stories like this point where, again, it's not just the Kindermord. 250,000 people die, and these just basically within a week. Beyond crazy. Again, people just haven't seen numbers like this before. And of course, as we're going to go through World War I, the numbers keep getting worse. More and more people keep dying. Leaders don't really seem to understand just how how devastating this is, how protracted this war is about to become. Anyways, the thing is that now you have this line going between the North Sea, the ocean, down to the Alps mountains, and it is completely trenched out. Both sides have trenches dug the entire way, and this is the beginning of trench warfare. So everything we've talked about up to this point has not been trench warfare. But from this point on, everything will be trench warfare until we get to the very last year, 1918, with what's called the Michael Offensive. So anyways, that's that. Now, in talking about trench warfare itself, I'd like to just go into that now. Just some basics. Why was this so deadly? It was deadly because it just wasn't one trench. It was a system of trenches. Look at the picture in the upper left-hand corner. That's an aerial photograph of, on one side, the German lines, and the left side, there is the British lines. And notice how you don't have just one trench against another trench. You have a huge amount of trenches, communication trenches, different defensive positions, all built throughout. You have trenches built out so you can bring reinforcements up, so they can't be, enemy fire can't get them. They're protected even when they're coming up. And both sides had this idea of like, okay, if our initial trenches, like our first, second, third trenches are breached, we start our reserve troops into digging new ones. If I got my numbers right, I believe the Germans, they had this idea that they had to be at least 7 trenches deep. And especially if the Allies penetrate into their second and third line, second and third trenches at any point, they got to start digging new ones, so they're always going to be 7 deep. The British and French usually were somewhere between 4 and 5 trenches, and it was always, once that second trench was breached or attacked, you start digging new trenches behind you just in case. This is what led to this idea of the stagnant warfare. The terminology that goes into this is the meat grinder. That's a literal way of looking at it. That's not any type of how do I put it? It's not being facetious in any way. That's not joking in any way. I got maybe a little bit on the joking side, but no, not really. Just meat grinder. That's what it is, a meat grinder, but humans in this case. But now, if you look at the diagram down the bottom right, you have this idea of you have your trench, you have your sandbags, you have barbed wire, communications going back and forth. Certain areas where you have machine guns, more fortified machine gun positions to be watching out. You always have your reconnaissance aircraft going up and over. And then in the very back, you have your artillery that have very good communication with. They're supposed to have very good communication with the front line. Just saying, okay, they're attacking here. Start leveling the battlefield. Now, the area in between the two trenches, like again, look at the picture in the upper left. I'm going to go back to the pointer if I can. Oh, didn't mean to do that. There we go. Sorry, just took me a little bit. This area right here is what's known as no man's land. If you've ever heard that term before, the area in between the two enemy trenches becomes no man's land. And that's where you just get, the dirt and the earth is so churned up from artillery fire, from machine guns, from grenades, from hand-to-hand combat, just everything. And then it's just littered with dead bodies. And in the beginning of the war, both sides were usually a little bit better about, allowing the other side to come out and reclaim their dead. But over time, that just didn't happen. They were just left out there. And so you got the smell that went along with everything as well. And these visuals are just awful. I don't want to start explaining things, but just meat grinder. I guess, if that gives you a visual, I'm sorry. But the no man's land is the literal meat grinder part of this. So, but basically what I'm trying to get in your minds is this idea that these are impassable things. The trenches where you spend tons of human life trying to get through just one of those trenches, yet there's more to go. And on any given attack, these leaders, when they send their men over the top, that's what it means to go over the top and go across no man's land and try to get to the other side. They're expecting, at least 20 to 25% casualties, knowing that they're going to have, killed or wounded 20 to 25% of their men before they even hit that first trench, usually due to machine gun fire and opposing enemy fire, whatever form it takes, artillery or whatnot. So, and then over time as well, both sides start realizing, well, the better, like, we're going to be in these trenches for a long time. Let's make them more livable. That's why I show the picture on the bottom left. That's a British trench. By the way, the German trenches were arguably much better put together. They brought in a lot of concrete and let's put it this way. The Germans expected to stay there for a while. The British built it up enough, but they always thought they'd be attacking and breaking through at some point. I say the British because I'm showing there, but the French and British, I say the Allied troops, think they're going to break through, so they don't build them up as much. They do later on, but the Germans, man, they're the ones that really excel at defensive trench warfare because, after they fail in the first initial couple months, they're on their heels mostly. The Allies have the advantage in troops, manpower, and ammunition and things like that. So that's a basic look at trench warfare. And the last thing I'm going to go through now is just kind of how this looks. Again, terrible map. Well, again, a terrible looking map, but one of the best ones I could find to just explain what I'm about to talk about. So let's take just a day where this says the British trenches on the left, you got the German trenches on the right. The British are going to attack the Germans. So when the British in here, they line up as many men as they can, get their ladders ready, they're about to blow the whistle over the top. As they before they do all this, they could usually have done probably two things. One thing is they send out engineering squads, sappers, if you've heard that term before, to go and basically cut up a bunch of the barbed wire, try to make areas that are much more passable for their troops to get through, to get to the side before they get killed. The faster they can get them across there, the less likely they are to die when they actually do the attack. If the Germans find out about this, so they see things, which they usually do, and vice versa, the British would always see the Germans when they were doing this, the French would see the Germans doing this when they were doing this. You send out your own teams, and all of a sudden you have these little mini battles on the ground in no man's land over these barbed wire areas where you're trying to kill the other sapper team, trying to repair the barbed wire, or the other guys are trying to take down the barbed wire, and just all this stuff going on. Sometimes you just launch a ton of artillery there and you try to mangle up the barbed wire to where you just bust it so it's a little bit easier to get through. Not as effective. It's still better to have people go out there and just actually cut it and open ways through. But that would happen kind of like the night before, maybe even up to 2 days before. The other thing that they could do with the artillery is they do what's called softening them up. And so you maybe bombard the enemy side, like the British could bombard the German trenches for hours, sometimes days, like a battle we're going to talk about later, the Battle of the Somme. It's up like a week of constant bombardment, just bombarding the Germans and trying to make them shell-shocked, just be like, I can't fight because I'm so messed up in the head. I haven't been able to sleep, I'm too scared, things like that. In some cases it works. In a lot of cases, these soldiers just got used to it. I mean, when you see what you see and you hear what you hear for a long period of time, a lot of these guys become very desensitized to that stuff. So it was depending, like this whole idea of bombardment to create shell shock, it just depended on the circumstance whether or not it was effective. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let's put it that way. But the day of the attack comes, so the British officers blow their whistles and they all start rushing across. Now, of course, they're going to run into the enemy fire from just the guys in the trenches with their rifle fire, but most importantly, or the most deadly part of the defenses, is the machine guns. If you're looking at all those German machine guns, each one basically has a field of fire. Like you fire at 45-degree angles, covering basically a 90-degree arc. And the reason why you don't want to fire too much this way is it's so hard to hit guys at that angle. Let the other machine guns deal with this. And your arc, your 90 or 45-degree angle in your overall 90-degree arc, if that's not making sense, I'm sorry. But your angle will crisscross with the guy next to you, so you're going to cover those guys in between you that are a little bit harder to hit. And so basically you have this nice swath of machine gun fire firing at everybody coming over the top. So the British get over the top, and let's say they lose, 40% casualties. And 40% of the guys get hit or killed, some way not able to fight, getting across no man's land. And then they hit the trenches. This is where the hand-to-hand comes into place. We went over a lot of the hand-to-hand weapons in class, and how nasty some of them are, like that Italian spiked mace. But probably the most effective one ever is the German shovel. But they get into this hand-to-hand combat, but you don't want to get stuck there, because if you get stuck in hand-to-hand combat right here, well, then that allows the British to even get over more, maybe stop those machine guns. So a lot of times, these machine guns, once you see the initial hand-to-hand fighting, they'll move. They'll move back to actually predefined positions back here behind the second trench. Then they'll go into an orderly retreat through these communication trenches to that second trench, which is in green here, as well. And all of a sudden, yes, they gave up the first trench, trying to lose as few people as possible. Although, yes, a lot of Germans are going to die doing that. But then the British are at this point where now they control this trench. The Germans control this trench. Most of the machine guns are over here. The British don't have their machine guns up here, although maybe they're moving them up. Excuse me. Just not worth stopping the recording. So, but now if you're kind of getting the idea that no man's land has shifted, it's no longer right here. This becomes a new no man's land. Now the British have to actually attack across here to get to this other trench, and there hasn't been any preparation done to cut that barbed wire or anything like that. It's all good. The Germans are behind a good, solid defenses, and even better for the Germans is they'll move some of those machine guns right at the end of these T intersections, where they'll have their machine guns there, and they will gun the British down or the Allied troops down as they come through there. And they'll have to kill a couple of them to start mounding them up to where it's just impassable. And it forces the British to go over the top again and get slaughtered again. Now maybe they get to that second trench and they've thrown enough guys in there to take the second one, but then they have to do the same thing again between that second and the third trench, and just on it goes. And by the time you get here, there's German troops on the way back just saying, okay, time to start digging a new one. Again, it's just, I hope you're getting the idea of just how bad this is. Now, let's say the British are like, okay, we can't go any further, and the Germans are like, okay, now we can get them. Now the Germans have a bunch of guys built up right here for a counterattack. Then they attack the British right here, who are basically dead tired. They get jacked, of course. Then the Germans go across here to get to the first trench. And at this point, they start running into the same problems that the British are. There's a lot of dead bodies everywhere. It's hard to get through. It's hard to reclaim the territory. There's a lot more British are coming in for reinforcements. But let's say the Germans take that, and then they think, let's go across ourselves. And then they go across, and then all of a sudden they run into the exact same thing that they did to the British, or the Allied troops, again, I should say, where now they're dealing with that varied machine gun fire. They're dealing with now the defenses that the Allies have in their trenches. And then they die going into the first, second, and maybe if they can get to that third trench, and just back and forth it goes. So this is just the best I could do to explain just how trench warfare works. And hopefully I get the chance to link in some video clips to help you out with this on Canvas. But anyways, there you go. There's a lesson on the basically the battles of Ypres and the establishment of trench warfare.